Hi, I'm Amy Hawkins. I'm based in Jackson County, Michigan, and I have been working in the political space for about 19 years as a person of faith. First of all, let me add this disclaimer. I love the political and government arena. I do believe that God has intended for his people to be engaged in this marketplace. And there is nothing sweeter than working in the arena to which God has called you. America is an amazing idea and an amazing nation. And you and I have experienced over the last couple of years aggressive loss of freedom and aggressive threats to so much of what we hold dear. One of the resources that I discovered many years ago is the potential of the church or the body of believers. You can look at statistics, you can look at information from George Barna, you can look at different resources that will tell you how little people of faith vote and how little people of faith actually get involved in the process. This is so sad to me. When I recognize that who God is and who he has made us to be in the earth, and that we are the conduits of solutions and hope to our communities, and yet I look at the bodies of believers. It doesn't matter what denomination. There is an aggressive absence of us showing up in the marketplace and showing up to vote. So as we're approaching the November 2022 election here in Michigan, I thought maybe it would be helpful to explain how you can start to equip and mobilize your body, your faith community for the election. Let's talk about a misunderstood concept. So often in our nation, you hear talk of how religious freedoms, they're precious, right? But that politics and government, they have to stay separate from religious institutions. You and I recognize the phrase separation of church and state. That has become the crutch up one way and down the other, so much to the fact that I don't think people really understand what it means. If you go back in history, and I encourage you to do that, use resources like David Barton with Wall Builders or and many other resources to dig into what does the phrase separation of church and state mean. When Thomas Jefferson, many moons ago, was addressed with this topic, here's what separation of church and state really means. And he explained it in a letter to the Danbury Baptist. What today's culture believes, first let me preface it with this, what today's culture believes is that there has to be a separation of church and state. Therefore, you cannot talk about politics in the church. It has to stay separate, which is such a false idea. And it really is a tool of the enemy to keep us from getting involved. So what did Thomas Jefferson mean when he talked about the separation of church and state? It was simply this. He didn't want the established government to tell you how to worship. So when you look at the US federal government now and the commands they're giving, the things that they're saying you can and you cannot do, it's almost like we've gone so far down the road, we're circling back again. That if we as people of faith will wake up and realize that you don't have to stand in the pulpit and say, vote Republican or vote Democrat. You can simply talk about the issues that when you and I, as people of faith, we believe that God applies to every area of our life, well, shouldn't he then also apply to what we believe on certain topics? How well do we care for the environment? How well do we take care of our families? Is life a virtue we should preserve and defend, right? So when you look at your churches, their mission really should be to point people to Christ. And as you're pointing people to Christ, to help them better understand what does that look like in a day-to-day process, right? Like, how are you being responsible? How are you being honest? But hey, what are your beliefs on marriage? And what are your beliefs on hard work ethic? And what are your beliefs on honesty and integrity, right? It should all tie together because when you're a person of faith, it should influence every part of your DNA. So as you approach the November 2022 election, you need to remember something, that the people of faith that go to church with you, it's highly possible that they don't know what you know, they don't see what you see, and they're not informed of what's at stake. So, what's my challenge to you? First of all, know truth. Get a quick understanding from trusted resources on what does the separation of church and state really mean. And then lean on organizations like Alliance Defending Freedom or Michigan Family Forum or Family Research Council or my old organization, Citizens for Traditional Values. Reach out to those organizations and say, can you point me to the resource that will explain what a church legally can and cannot do? So here's how it applies to now. As we're in the final days leading up to an election and absentee ballots have hit the ground and people are starting to vote, the people, if you're like, man, what can I do to like draw attention to the importance of this election? Here's where you can start. If you're tied in with a community, first of all, reach out to the secretary of the church or the pastor, a church board member, and say, hey, are you aware that there is an election on November 8th in 2022 of this year in Michigan? It's highly possible that your church leadership is 100 times on that they're on top of the topic and they're preparing voter guides and they're preparing to notify the church community. It's also possible that no, they did not know there's an election and wait, it's not a presidential election year, that this is an opportunity for you to serve the community of believers. For you to reach out. So first of all, reach out to your secretary, your church leadership to say, did you know there's an election? They may say, yes, we're on top of it. And you can say, awesome. What can I do to help? They may say, no, we haven't gotten to that. And you can say, instead of yelling, screaming, throwing tomatoes, saying, why aren't you on top of this? Approach it more in the spirit of honor to say, wow, thank you so much for your time. Could I send some information to you for you to consider for us to possibly let our body know of what's at stake? There is information that will guide you through the process. Citizens for Traditional Values can walk you through the legal do's and don'ts of what you can and cannot do. So, but there are basic things, there are civic things that are simple that you can put into people's hands. When you approach your church leadership, and some might say, well, I had not thought about it, but what do you propose? It could be a number of different things. It could be, hey, can we put a reminder in the bulletin that says, reminder, there is a big election. Here are some of the things that you have the opportunity to weigh in on. If you'd like more information, contact me, Pastor. I'd be glad to be your point person to direct them then to further information. That's one option. Another option is maybe the pastor says, you know what, the only thing I'm comfortable with is just calling our people to be praying for the election. If that's all they're comfortable with, then go with it. That matters. It's also possible they're open to you setting up a table in the foyer to register people to vote, to give people the information on where to find their sample ballot. Or, hey, if you need a ride to the polls, let us know in the foyer, and we'd love to make arrangements to serve you with a ride to the polls. It's also possible that they would be open to nonpartisan voter guides. What is a voter guide? Well, it's one of the amazing tools in our toolkit that we have the opportunity to provide to people. A nonpartisan voter guide is simply that, a nonpartisan voter guide. So it puts the two candidates that are running against each other, or maybe it's just the proposals, and it lists out what is it, like, and who is endorsing. So if you take two candidates, let's say Joe Biden versus Donald Trump, you can list out who has endorsed them. Where do they stand on different issues? Now, here's the trick. You could take that voter guide and you could distribute it to churches with their permission in a very progressive area. And it might inspire those people to turn out and vote for Joe Biden, right? You can take that same document, you can put it into strategic hands of people that are more likely to be pro-life, pro-traditional values, pro-limited government, right? And people will vote for Donald Trump. A leader that I love and respect once said, actually has said many times, never assume that I see what you see, know what you know, or hear what you hear. You and I have the opportunity by the resources that have already been prepared for us or are in preparation of being prepared, and by the community that we are in touch with, to distribute information that could be of service to your community. Well, Amy, where do I find these voter guides? First of all, reach out to these two organizations, Michigan Family Forum, Michigan Family, untapped.org, and you can find on their website, if it's not there now, it's coming soon, an amazing voter guide that will look at so many different races. And you can print out portions for your community. Check with Citizens for Traditional Values, ctvmichigan.org. They most likely are doing voter guides in strategic areas around the state, and it's possible your church is in a target area that they have a very targeted voter guide. Regardless, even if you can only do one thing, point people to the sample ballots that you can find, michigan.gov/vote. Go to the voter information tab at the top, type in your information, and generate what is going to be on your ballot when you vote. Point them to that. Point them to the honor and the privilege and the responsibility of getting to vote. So many people will say, my vote doesn't count. But how do you know that? And I believe that you and I have a responsibility to do the most that we can with in the best way that we can here on earth, in a way that honors God. So you will be amazed that some races, they will win or lose by just a handful of votes. So may you and I live and do all that we can in this hour, so that when we get up on the day after election, we can look at ourselves in the mirror and we can have confidence that God said, you did all that you could. That's all that I ask. So make sure that you are doing all that you can to distribute information to your community of faith. They need to know. Their votes matter. And you and I know that if we can mobilize people of faith, the conservative, aka pro-life, limited government, pro-freedom candidates and issues win. So embrace the challenge. Let this be a year for awakening the people of faith to action. We need their support. We need their votes. Our nation is at stake, and you and I have too much to live for. So thank you for listening to this. Share this with a friend and go contact your church.